Paedon Brown was the first brown kid willing to go on a podcast and just say it. No editing, no media training, no script. Just a guy sitting across from a microphone telling you exactly what he thought about his father, his family, the show, and the wreckage that came after 15 seasons of cameras in every room. For a while, he was the audience's favorite. He was the one who said what everyone at home was already thinking. He was raw. He was specific. He used names. He used dates. And in a media landscape full of reality TV families who had learned to smile through everything, Paedon Brown was something genuinely rare. He was honest. And then he kept talking. And the family figured out what kind of son he was actually going to be. And so did the rest of us. If you are new here, hit that like button right now, subscribe to Sister Wives Crew, and turn on notifications, because we go places on this channel that the show itself never had the nerve to go to. Now let's get into it. Here's the thing about the Brown family brand that nobody talks about plainly enough. For 15 seasons, the entire premise of Sister Wives was transparency. Kody and Robin and Christine and Janelle and Mary sat on couches and in talking heads and in family meetings and said out loud, on camera, "This is our life. This is what we believe. This is how we fight and love and survive." The show sold itself as the honest version of a plural family. Not the cult version, not the secretive compound version, the open, willing, look-at-us version. We tell you everything. That was the brand. That was the pitch to TLC and to viewers, and to the culture at large. We are the family that will actually show you. And then one of the kids took that premise seriously. One of the kids looked at that brand and said, "Okay, I will actually show you." And what Paedon discovered is that the whole family discovered that the brand had limits. The transparency had edges. There were things the show would go up to and not cross. Conversations that would start and not finish. Confrontations that would be cut before the resolution arrived. Paedon found those edges. Not because he was trying to blow anything up, because he was doing exactly what 15 seasons of this show had taught him to do. He was just doing it in real time, without a production team deciding what made the final cut. That is the irony that runs through everything Paedon has said publicly since the family's implosion became undeniable. He is not operating outside the family's tradition. He is operating inside it. He just removed the filter. And the filter, it turns out, was doing a lot of work. Now, let's talk about the credibility problem this creates, because it is genuinely interesting and it does not resolve cleanly in either direction. If Paedon's accounts are accurate, and I mean the specific things he has said on various podcasts and social media platforms about his father's behavior, about the dynamic inside the family during the years the cameras were rolling, about what Kody was actually like as a father versus what the show presented, if those accounts are accurate, then someone in this family has to engage with them. They have to say, yes, that happened, or no, that's not how it was, or here's the context you're missing. Nobody has done that. Not Kody, not Robin, not any of the other adult children who have built larger platforms, and who would theoretically have the most to lose from Paedon's version of events being accepted as truth. On the other hand, if his accounts are not accurate, if there is exaggeration or selective memory, or the kind of emotional distortion that happens when someone processes a painful childhood through the lens of a broken adult relationship, then somebody in the family needs to say which parts. Point to something specific. Correct the record. And nobody has done that either. What you are left with is silence, and the silence is its own answer. Because in a family that built a television empire on the premise of radical openness, strategic silence is not neutral. Strategic silence is a choice. And the choice to not engage with Paedon's specific claims, to let them sit out there in podcast archives and comment sections and fan forums, says something about how close he actually got to something real. I want to be careful here, because I am not going to sit here and tell you that everything Paedon has ever said is the unvarnished gospel. That is not how human beings work, and it is especially not how adult children processing complicated family histories work. People remember things through their own emotional experience. People emphasize the parts that hurt most. People, especially people who are young and angry and trying to make sense of a father who seemed to disappear from their lives during the exact years when they needed him most, people in that situation do not always land in a place of perfect objectivity. That is not a character flaw. That is just what grief does to memory. But here is what I keep coming back to. Paedon is specific. He is not a guy who gets on a podcast and says, "My dad wasn't great," and leaves it vague. He says things. He names dynamics. He describes moments. He talks about what it was like to watch his mother leave, and what that cost her, and what it cost the kids who loved her. He talks about what the relationship with his father looked like from the inside, not from the couch interview version, not from the talking head version, but from the version that was happening in the house while the cameras were pointed somewhere else. Specificity is not proof, but specificity is harder to dismiss than vagueness. And the family, none of them has come back with comparable specificity in the other direction. Let's talk about the platform problem, because this is where Paedon's situation becomes genuinely uncomfortable to watch. He is not building what Mykelti has built. He is not building what Gwendlyn has built. Both of them have found ways to turn their Brown family identity into content infrastructure. Mykelti with her home and family brand, Gwendlyn with her more irreverent, fourth-wall-breaking social media presence. Both of them have audiences that follow them for reasons beyond just being Kody Brown's kids. Both of them have monetized something. Paedon has candor. That is what he has. He has a willingness to say things, and in the current media environment, that willingness has gotten him onto podcasts and into comment threads and onto fan lists of most honest brown child. But willingness without infrastructure is a particular kind of vulnerability, because when you say the thing when you go on a show and tell people what you actually think happened in your family, you absorb the cost of that disclosure immediately. The relationships that get strained, the family members who pull back, the father who goes even more silent. Those costs arrive right away. The upside, if there is one, gets distributed across whoever hosts the podcast, whoever runs the fan account, whoever writes the recap. Paedon says the thing and somebody else clips it and monetizes it, and Paedon is left holding the relational tab. That is not a sustainable position. And I think if you watch Paedon across multiple interviews over time, you can see him starting to understand that about his own situation. There are moments where he pulls back slightly from something he said before. There are moments where you can see him recalibrating in real time, not walking things back exactly, but recognizing that the words have weight, and the weight does not land only on him. It lands on his mother. It lands on his siblings. It lands on people he still loves and still wants relationships with. Candor has a blast radius. And when you do not have a production team managing that radius, it gets unpredictable. Now, I want to spend some real time on the moment that I think reframes everything else. Because if you look at Paedon's public profile and you only look at the controversial stuff, the podcast moments, the hot takes, the things that ended up in fan forums as evidence of family dysfunction, you might come away with a picture of a guy who is just burning things down. A guy who has decided that the best way to process his family's collapse is to narrate it out loud for strangers on the internet. And there is some truth in that picture. But it is not the whole picture. At Christine Brown's wedding to David Woolley, Paedon walked his mother partway down the aisle and then handed her to her father. That is the moment I need you to sit with. Think about what that assignment means. Christine is walking into the next chapter of her life. She is leaving behind the most defining and painful relationship she ever had. She is, in that moment, both incredibly happy and, if we are being honest, carrying 15 years of complicated history with her down that aisle. And the person she chose to walk beside her for part of that journey, the person she trusted to hold her arm, to match her pace, to be present with her in those few seconds before she became somebody's wife, was Paedon. Not in spite of everything he has said publicly, alongside it. That is a mother telling you something. That is Christine Brown, who knows exactly what Paedon has said and how he has said it and what it has cost, looking at her son and saying, "You still have my trust. You still have a place in the biggest moment of my new beginning." Whatever the public commentary has cost him in other relationships, it did not cost him that. And I think that beat matters enormously, because it complicates the story in the most human way possible. Paedon is not the son who destroyed his relationship with his family through candor. He is the son whose mother gave him the aisle. That distinction deserves to be said clearly and without hedging. Now, I want to give you my actual read on what drives Paedon, because I think the standard interpretation gets it slightly wrong. Most people, when they analyze Paedon's public behavior, treat it as a brand strategy. They say he figured out that being the honest one was his lane, and he drove hard in it because the other lanes were taken. Mykelti had the wholesome married mom lane. Gwendlyn had the witty millennial lane. Paedon took the unfiltered lane because it was available and because it got attention. I understand why people read it that way, but I do not think it is right. Brand strategies adapt. Brand strategies respond to feedback. Brand strategies notice when something is costing more than it is generating and make adjustments. Paedon has not really done that. He has not pivoted. He has not rebranded. He has not done the thing that a person doing conscious audience management would do, which is sand down the edges that cause the most damage and keep the parts that get the most engagement. He just keeps saying what he thinks, even when it clearly costs him. Even when you can see from his own demeanor in interviews that he understands it is going to cost him before he finishes the sentence. That is not a brand strategy. That is a personality trait. And personality traits are a different category of thing, because personality traits do not respond to incentives the way strategies do. A strategy can be abandoned. A personality trait mostly just is what it is. You work around it, you develop coping mechanisms, you get better at timing and context, but the underlying thing stays. Paedon is going to keep saying what he thinks. The family is going to keep adjusting around it. And at some point, the adjustments become the relationship itself, not the repair of a relationship, not the tension inside a relationship, but the actual texture of how they are connected to each other going forward. That is not a tragedy exactly, but it is a kind of permanent negotiation that both sides have to be willing to sustain. And the question of whether this family, particularly the part of this family that orbits Kody, is willing to sustain that negotiation indefinitely is one that I think remains genuinely open. Here is something that I think gets missed in the broader conversation about Kody Brown's sons. When Kody talks about his sons on camera, and I mean across the entire run of the show, not just the recent seasons when everything went sideways, the language gets vague. The emotional content gets thin. The specificity that he can bring to talking about his wives, about the theology of plural marriage, about his vision for Coyote Pass, and what it would mean for the family. That specificity largely disappears when the subject is his sons. Specific moments are hard to find. Concrete memories, named and dated, are rare. Love is asserted. The presence is implied. The actual granular texture of a father-son relationship is mostly absent. Paedon, by contrast, is specific to a fault. He is the guy who will tell you exactly what conversation happened, approximately when it happened, what the stakes felt like in the moment, and how it sits in his memory now. The asymmetry between these two modes of communication is not subtle, and it is not accidental. One of them is willing to use names and dates and moments, the other isn't. And in a family that sold itself to the world as the transparent family, the one that would show you everything, the asymmetry is the inauthenticity. It is not Paedon who breaks the brand promise of the Brown family. It is the gap between his candor and his father's vagueness that reveals what the brand promise was actually built on. The show told audiences that plural marriage, when practiced correctly and in good faith, produced strong sons with strong fathers. That was part of the implicit argument for 15 seasons. Kody was not just a husband to 4 women, he was a patriarch, a presence, the anchor of something larger than a conventional family. The sons would grow up inside something extraordinary. The sons would be shaped by a father who was fully committed to all of them. Paedon's relationship with that thesis is complicated and public and ongoing. What is important to understand is that he did not reject the thesis outright. He is not somebody who decided his father was always bad and the family was always broken and nothing real was ever there. He is somebody who believed it genuinely and then watched it fail in real time and then tried to process what that failure meant about everything that came before it. He kept testing the thesis out loud. He kept asking in public whether this was actually what strong sons in strong families are supposed to look like, whether this outcome was the intended one or whether something went wrong somewhere, and if something went wrong, when exactly that was, and whose choices made it inevitable. That is what strong sons are supposed to do, by the way. They are supposed to question. They are supposed to push back. They are supposed to hold their fathers accountable to the version of fatherhood those fathers publicly claimed. Paedon is doing exactly that. The irony is that the family's ideology, taken seriously, demands exactly the kind of reckoning Paedon is trying to have. It is just that nobody expected one of the kids to actually push for it. Here is the last thing I want to say before we get to where this actually lands. People talk about Paedon being isolated, and there is a version of that conversation that is true. He is, by his own framing in interviews, operating somewhat outside the inner circle of Brown children who have a more active public presence together. But I want to be precise about the nature of that isolation, because I think it gets mischaracterized. He is not isolated from his mother. The wedding aisle tells you that. He is not isolated from his siblings. The relationships are complicated and shifting, as they are with almost all the Brown kids right now, but Paedon has not been formally cut off from the sibling network the way some of the more dramatic fan theories suggest. He is not isolated from his stepfather, David Woolley, or from the new chapter his mother is building. What Paedon is isolated from, and this is the thing he has said in various ways across multiple interviews, is the version of his father that he wanted. The version that the show implied existed. The Kody who was supposed to be the patriarch. The anchor. The man who showed up in specific and irreplaceable ways for each of his children. That version of Kody, the one Paedon was raised to expect. The one the theology promised. The one 15 seasons of television gestured at without quite delivering. That version does not exist. Maybe it never did. Maybe it existed briefly and then got lost somewhere in the years when Robin's children arrived and the family's center of gravity shifted. Maybe Paedon is wrong about what was lost and right about what is missing. The exact accounting matters less than the fundamental reality. You cannot repair a relationship with a version of a person who no longer exists. You can only decide what to do with the person who is actually there. And that is the most honest and the most painful thing Paedon Brown has said. Across all the podcasts and all the social media posts and all the unscripted moments that have made him the most quoted Brown kid of this particular era. Not the hot takes, not the specific accusations, not the things that ended up as screenshots in fan forums. The honest core of it is simpler and sadder than any of that. I had a father I believed in, and then I didn't. And I am still trying to figure out what to do with that. That is a story about grief. It is a story about a kid who took the promises of his family's public identity seriously and then had to watch those promises fail. And it is being told out loud, in real time, without a script, by a young man who has not yet figured out how to wrap it up with a clean ending because there is no clean ending available yet. There is just the ongoing work of figuring out who you are when the version of your family you grew up inside turns out to have been a more complicated thing than anyone admitted while the cameras were running. Paedon Brown is going to keep talking. Some of the family is going to keep listening. His mother has already shown you where she stands. The interesting question now is which other members of this family eventually decide that what Paedon has to say is worth engaging with seriously, and what changes when they do. Because something will change. It always does, when the quieter version of a story stops being the only version that gets told. Comment the microphone emoji down below if you think Paedon ends up with the most honest channel of any Brown kid. Comment the zipped lips emoji if you think he eventually goes quiet and stops doing interviews. And subscribe to Sister Wives Crew right now because I am covering every single Paedon interview in chronological order. In the next series, we are going through all of it in sequence. And by the end of it, you are going to have a completely different picture of this family than the one the show ever gave you. Hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next one.